If your kidneys and your skin can't keep up with this excess urea in the bloodstream, it crystallizes into uric acid, and the body wants to push it away from the vital organs, so it pushes it away as far as possible. And what's further from your vital organs than anything? Your big toe.
Yeah.
And that's why the first place gout often shows up is the big toe, and then spreads into the rest of the feet. Very rarely it can hit fingers first, but it's almost always the big toe. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty simple treatment. We have to look at not whipping them, but just encouraging the kidneys to work a little better.
Welcome to the Light Cellar podcast, brought to you by Light Cellar, a place where you can learn to find and craft your own food and medicine. In this interview series, you will meet a range of characters in the health and wellness space that are bringing light to your everyday. You'll hear from a number of different experts on a wide variety of topics. We have several different series within the podcast, including our Wild Wisdom and Storytelling with Blaine Andrusek, the Rays of Light, inspiring wellness in the community, plus solo casts, Q&As, and other topics for you to enjoy. You can find this as a video version, as well as the audio on any of your favorite platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody you know who will benefit. You can also shop online at lightcellar.ca. Hey, welcome. It's been a while.
Couple of weeks off.
Yeah, for one reason and another. We did not get our regular visits in, so we're back at it on a beautiful, almost March day. I hate to kind of date these conversations. I mean, it is a marker of time, but the conversations we have are timeless. People can listen anytime and absolutely get a ton of value. So,
I agree.
Although, I did forget, I was going to check, because we actually set your Herbal First Aid course. So we have it in the calendar, lightcellar.ca.
Something like the 23rd and 4th, the 23rd of April, I think.
Yeah.
It's something I like to do before camping season starts, so that people can
totally
pick stuff up and prepare their kit or whatever.
Camping, hiking, all that stuff. Yeah. So, this is something that we dove into a number of episodes ago. It was back in probably December, I think it was. Even into January, we touched upon Herbal First Aid. And this will be the opportunity we did hint at. A class was coming. It is now set. It's going to be in April 2024.
And I've started writing, because I could rattle on about that for 2 days. And I only have 5 or 6 hours. So I'm writing a fairly comprehensive. Yesterday I started thinking, well, this is turning into a freaking book here. But that way I don't have to worry about things that I forgot to say or whatever, because I can...
It'll all be in the manual.
Relax and march through it, but yeah.
Yeah, so... Yeah, maybe give folks just maybe a quick kind of insight into what that afternoon's going to look like. As you mentioned, I think it's about 5.5 hours we have scheduled for the session, which will include, like a break and that kind of thing. But, one thing you did want to emphasize is... it's not going to be like bandaging and this kind of a thing. Like
none of that. We're not covering CPR and how to do a triangular bandage for a broken arm and none of that stuff.
Yeah, plenty of other courses out there to learn that wisdom. This is an opportunity to, gain insight from your unique expertise and, using the herbs and oils and other things that you can have in your first aid kit. As well as, if you're out in the mountains, heck, if you're in the city, what are some of those plants around you that you can grab and utilize?
Yeah, and there's like one that I haven't written yet, but as an example, pretty much the best thing happening for a wasp sting is plantain crushed up. But you have to crush up the leaves and put them on and leave them on, so you need to bandage it somehow.
Right.
And if I'm going out even to the mailbox, never mind the dog park, midsummer, wasp season, I don't leave the house without my little anti-venom in my pocket because I don't have to deal with any bandaging or anything. You just take a couple of drops and rub it in and you're good to go.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot quicker. But I'll mention both, you know.
Yeah.
And some of those blends, I think I've given the recipes away so many times in my past courses that I'll probably include the ingredients even on a couple of those things. Not that there's so many things that cross over. You know, you can make an alternative blend with what's already in your collection, kind of thing.
Right.
The more that you understand the chemistry, the better you can do crossovers like that.
Right. Yeah. Substitutions, because
Yeah.
at some point it's just the same chemistry, right?
Yeah, you'll get beta-caryophyllene, for example, is a well-documented anti-inflammatory that's in German chamomile, but that's also what makes CBD oil tick. And now we have a delightful surprise. I think you were one of the people that wanted me to find it, was Copaiba.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it's a fraction of the cost of German chamomile and CBD oil as well. So, yeah, there's things like that that are, sometimes we get surprises from nature that, well, there's always more than one way to deal with things, is the point.
Yeah, totally. Which kind of brings up this, we were just having a little huff before we started. Respiration and flu blend. Things have been going around. I know so many people are kind of, you know, heavily down and out, and others just with kind of like a little mild something. And so this is always a good, kind of first line of defense, upliftment, as you described, just kind of warming the lungs. And respiration and flu blend, you're saying anytime you've offered it to somebody, like, don't give me that Vicks, you know, like they've got this traumatic memory associated with Vicks. And so you did a formula that, you know, would achieve what you wanted it to, but not remind people of...
Well, a lot of mothers used to literally take a spoon and stuff Vicks up kids' noses, and that's pretty harsh.
Yeah.
Right? And then when you have a negative memory from childhood, like I always tell both students and clients and whatnot, especially students, that if you have a remedy, and this comes back to if you bring up the question at any sort of herbal conference, what's the biggest flaw with the herbal industry? It's compliance.
Right.
Because so many things like somebody might really need golden seal,
Right.
but if you give it to them in a tincture form,
Yeah.
I've had people look at me and say, well, I'd effing rather die than ever take this again. You know, so you need to have ways of getting around that, and there's always another way, kind of thing. Nature is bountiful and beautiful all over the world. If you just have to keep studying, and that's why I emphasize that the more you know the chemistry, the easier it is to make substitutions.
Right.
Some years ago, a civil war had broken out in Madagascar, and a lot of the people there that wildcraft things like Ravensara,
Right.
which is one of my favorite antivirals, couldn't even get fuel for their trucks. And ylang ylang, a lot of it comes from there.
Right.
Clove.
Yeah.
So I was really concerned that we were going to have no inventory of some of my favorite oils for that winter. So again, you have to look at substitutions, right, and find alternate sources. But that was my job.
Right. Yeah. That must have been about the time that vanilla did a huge jump. Madagascar is a big producer of that. Papua New Guinea. Yeah. But curious thing about vanilla, one of the reasons it's so expensive originates from Mexico, I believe, where it has a native pollinator, but
where it's been moved and shifted and grown elsewhere in the world, it doesn't have that native pollinator, so it's got to be hand pollinated.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and that's one of the
Yeah,
reasons.
because it went up like 400% overnight.
Yeah, it was like, what? I remember I used to buy vanilla beans, like, massive, like stacks of them, like pound bundles for like $25. It was less than $1 a bean. This was going back quite a few years. But good luck trying to get a whole vanilla bean under $1. That doesn't exist anymore. Yeah.
Well, that's last time I bought it. They were over $1 each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, the way of the world. There's lots of factors in that. So let's touch upon this idea. You and I had connected on a topic within the last couple of weeks, just via text, and it speaks to this idea that no matter where you go, there's always a remedy available. One just needs to know, what it is. And so I had a question with you about gout. What was a good kind of remedy for that? And so you sent a great explanation of like, first, what is gout? And then, how, especially people here who had a very high, meat diet, how they dealt with that, and gout wasn't an issue.
Yeah, no matter where you are in the world, as soon as you go up into the mountains or north, you get into places where it's cold for much of the year, and there's no way you're going to survive as a vegetarian.
No.
And when I started that trip in my youth, I started at minus 27. Well, you can't order a salad.
No.
In northern Saskatchewan at that temperature. There's lots of good green things to eat in the summer, well, especially spring.
Yeah.
When you get nettles and things coming back. And a plantain that can be so mild that if you made a Caesar salad with it, you wouldn't know it wasn't romaine lettuce, under the right conditions.
Yeah, totally.
So weather is a factor always. And but everywhere in the world, I've always felt that everywhere in the world where what's available for food creates an imbalance that could cause essentially a disease in the body, herbs grow there, and people figured it out. And those became regular, like even using oregano in pasta sauce
Right.
is because carbohydrate and protein together is bad food combining. Or things like, people say, well, what's this man telling us here? A hot dog or a ham sandwich or roast beef with potatoes are all examples of a bad combination of carbs that want to move quick,
Right.
and meat that want to go slow. So what you need to do is raise your acid levels, and what does that almost better than anything is any member of the mustard family. So what a shocking relation this man is sharing, that mustard on a hot dog, or horseradish with prime rib,
Yeah.
or especially wasabi, which is the strongest mustard, with fish, especially raw fish, is all to overcome the bad food combining.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they become customary, just part of the dishes, right? Just customary, I'm missing the word here, condiments.
Right.
And people don't even realize that we've just gotten used to the taste.
Yeah. Yeah, because I can't imagine the first person to eat horseradish, right? Would have gone
Was
like-
impressed.
Yeah.
Your eyes are watering, you got mucus flying out of your face all over the place.
Yeah. This is good. Yeah.
I remember my mother had a hand grinder, no Vitamixes back then, a hand grinder that bolted onto the edge of a countertop.
Right.
And she used to make this relish with horseradish and pickled beets. It was just a really nice combo, and it made the horseradish a lot more tolerable to us as children, and I'm my mouth's watering even just remembering that. So, yeah, you make it work. Anyway, back to the goat thing. It's as a culture and as individuals, each of us are so complicated. Like, you think you know your friends, or how well do you really? or, people at work, or even your spouse, for example. There's always hidden surprises in there somewhere. And yet, biologically, we are such simple creatures. We're literally 96% 4 atoms. That's it. 96% of who you are.
Right.
Like in good health, we're around 70% water.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big chunk.
Yeah.
And then every cell of your body needs glucose consistently. So we have different types of sugars in our diet, and we can store sugar between meals in your liver and in your muscle tissue.
Right.
But you're burning off most of it, hopefully, and if you aren't, excess sugar can be stored as fat. So there we've just got carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, just 3. And then as soon as we get nitrogen involved, we are introduced to proteins, which are both for our musculature, but also a lot of specific molecules that we use in our immune system. So the thing is, we don't seem to have any way of storing excess protein.
Right.
And when people worked hard physically, they were often protein deficient.
Right.
If we go back to family farms and so forth, or even when you look at something like you might have a chicken, a chicken was shared by a family of 8 people, almost more like a condiment than the main part of the meal. Or we look at Asian food where there might be some type of like Peking duck or whatever, and it's more like a garnish. Where here, well, where's my duck? I want half a duck. We tend to eat a lot of protein, and often with very sedentary jobs and lifestyles, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is your liver can take any simple protein and pull the nitrogen out, turning, for example, a T-bone steak into sugar. And then you're back to turning it into glucose, which you can burn off or store as fat. But when it takes the nitrogen out, it dumps it into the bloodstream. And anything in carbon chemistry, organic chemistry, carbon chemistry, anything less than an atomic weight of 10 wants to be a 10. That's why we have like H2O.
Right.
Oxygen is 8 and we get 2 hydrogens, so that's a 10. So nitrogen dumped into the bloodstream quickly its atomic number 7, quickly holds hands with 3 hydrogen atoms to form urea.
Right.
And that is easily filtered out of your bloodstream by your kidneys and your third kidney, which is your skin. So that's why sweat and urine have a lot in common.
Right.
If you haven't bathed for a long time, you smell a little pissy because you are. You're excreting some of the same compounds, right? And that's okay because they become part of your immune system with the acidic coating that happens to protect you from bacteria. So blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so if your kidneys and your skin can't keep up with this excess urea in the bloodstream, it crystallizes into uric acid, and the body wants to push it away from the vital organs, so it pushes it away as far as possible. And what's further from your vital organs than anything? Your big toe.
Yeah.
And that's why the first place gout often shows up is the big toe, and then spreads into the rest of the feet. Very rarely it can hit fingers first, but it's almost always the big toe. So it's a pretty simple treatment. We have to look at not whipping them, but just encouraging the kidneys to work a little better. And ironically, right here in southern Alberta, people ate more red meat, whether it was bear or bison, tatanka, or eventually cattle. We happen to have the best diuretics in the world. There's the same herbs that we have here in the mountains and foothills don't grow around the equator because they've got other problems.
Right.
So they've got other herbs that are abundant, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we can look at the diets of whether it's our local indigenous people or even northern Japanese, and it's a circumpolar thing,
Right.
where winters were long and harsh and you can't get enough plant material, so being a vegetarian was almost impossible. People had to eat more meat and fish, and this became an issue. And yet I remember when my father had gout and I was trying to explain this story, and he said, well, that can't be, son, because our native friends, they ate a lot of meat all the time. All they ate was buffalo. And I went, yes, Dad, but they ate their herbs too. The herbs grow here, and they ate them, and they drank them, and they smoked them.
Yeah.
They're used in all sorts of different ways. When you think about it, the skin being your third kidney, the sweat lodge was used medicinally.
Right.
Spiritually as well, cleansing, but physically cleansing, you'd go in and sweat, so all of that extra urea was coming out of your skin, and they never heard of gout and arthritis, which are both related to overacidity, right? So I mentioned in the car that if you walked from Cochrane to Whistler, somehow through mountain valleys and whatnot, you would never, ever, ever be out of sight of junipers and another common plant called bearberry, or Arctostaphylos uva ursi. Uva ursi just means little bear, and it's a low-growing mat that has red. They're kind of powdery, mealy berries. They're not poisonous, but they're not nice to eat.
Yeah.
Grouse eat them.
Right.
So I like to let the grouse eat them, and then I'll eat the grouse.
There we are.
And sometimes people confuse them with dwarf cranberries, but if you compare them, if you can, like I have a slide I would show in a class of the two plants together, and once you've seen them together, there's no mistaking them. The leaves of uva ursi, or bearberry, have almost a pear shape to them.
Right.
And they're kind of a dry green
Yeah.
color.
Yeah, much more elongated.
Yeah, and the leaves of the little dwarf cranberry are perfectly elliptical with a prominent midrib, and they're dark green and shiny.
Yeah.
And so are the berries, because
Right.
they're cranberries. They're shiny, bright red, juicy, tart.
Yeah.
But there's no mistaking the two.
And depending on the time of year, like I wouldn't expect to go out and find cranberries now, but I could probably find some bearberries currently. Like they seem to overwinter.
Oh yeah, they're evergreen. Yeah,
Yeah, much easier than the cranberries.
Well, and if the birds haven't eaten them, there's cranberries.
Okay.
In fact, a common thing that'll happen is at this time of year when we start having Chinooks and cold again,
Right.
the sugars and things in the cranberries will start to ferment. And you can get, sometimes you'll find patches of them where you can get quite a buzz on, because as they ferment and then freeze again,
Yeah.
there's quite a bit of alcohol in those little berries.
Yeah.
You'll even, sometimes you'll notice animals behaving a little weird,
Totally.
and it's because they're drunk on the alcohol in the cranberries.
Yeah.
So they're out there too. And in both cases, you'll find them. I'm just looking across the street from you here. The front lawn on the slope of your neighbor's lot there would be the sort of places I would go looking for either of them in the foothills. A nice, dry, sunny hillsides kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cranberries into mossy areas too, but
Right.
nice open sunny areas at least.
Yeah.
And grouse eat both of them. In fact, I used to think when I was young, before I knew better, that I could smell grouse. And it took a long time before I realized that what I was actually smelling was high bush cranberry, which has a powerful scent from the bark.
Yeah.
And in the fall, which would be hunting season, the bark is especially fragrant. So I wasn't smelling grouse. I was smelling the cranberries, which is where the grouse were to eat them.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, it helped me bag some birds. So anyway, so we want to use any of the herbs. There's others, even parsley helps your kidneys work better, much milder. But bearberry or Arctostaphylos uva ursi, and these are often available in combinations because they help treat kidney and bladder infections as well.
Right.
In fact, in uva ursi, there's a glycoside, which is sort of an hourglass-shaped molecule that by itself whole isn't even bioactive, but in the nephrons of the kidney, the hourglass is cleaved, and you're actually forming an antibiotic right on site.
Yeah.
So your urine is an antibiotic.
Wow.
And it treats the kidney and anything downstream. So both of those plants are very easily found. And if you go out to the near foothills, I mean, you could literally fill a pickup truck in a short period of time with uva ursi.
Yeah.
And for that one, we decoct it, which means you slow boil it as opposed to steep it, because the leaves are quite leathery.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of cook it low and slow for a while to get the action. But we want to lower the protein content of the diet and or start working out more or something. So start lowering protein, especially red meat if you do eat it at all. But even a high protein vegetarian diet could be an issue, lentils and things overdone. So lower the protein in the diet and support the kidneys.
Right.
And I don't have an alternative, but when I was practicing, my combination was, Terry had one called KB herb, which stood for kidney bladder.
Right.
And it was very inexpensive because those herbs are so easy to find and they're inexpensive. And then I made a blend of essential oils that would start working immediately. It had some of the same herbs in the blend, along with things like birch or wintergreen, which were like using liquid aspirin. So it would start working on the pain immediately.
Right.
So the oil could be used topically for immediate results, also working on the underlying cause, as well as over time the oral herbs working on stimulating the kidneys to work better. And one of the easiest conditions to treat. Really.
Yeah, yeah. And then cherries as well, you mentioned.
Oh, yes. And cherries have, I forget what the compounds are, that in season, of course, eating them fresh, but you can buy them frozen in bags in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been out there a long time. I remember Dr. Bernard Jensen, he even had a product, I believe, that was like a dark, tart cherry concentrate one could take. Yeah, it's very quickly, easily remedied. And herbs are there, whatever you need.
That's it.
Yeah.
I wish everything was so simple.
Yeah, it's true.
But I praise the story of how those herbs are so abundant here where the red meat was so abundant.
Yeah. So what about the people up north, what the old not so PC terminology of the Eskimo, which translates to raw eater, the Inuit, as they're now described. They had a heavy high meat diet. I don't know too much about them. I've also, because they're up Arctic Circle. I've heard that, even, and this probably isn't hard to beat, but definitely compared to your average modern North American, they actually had a much higher diverse plant intake than your average North American, even though they lived in an environment where very, very few plants grew. I've heard the number of like over 100 different plants that they utilized.
Well, and this brings back to something that's a big part of your work now at the shop. They were quite into fermentation.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
There's a number of plants that would grow in the short summers that they would start fermenting in. They didn't have crocks, they had sealskin same thing. They'd have a little wooden frame to support a sealskin bladder kind of thing.
Yeah.
And get fermentations going before the harsh winter hit, so that by the time the weather got cold, they could have that sitting in the I'm forgetting the word for the entrance, like with a tent when you have
Right.
what do we call that?
The vestibule.
A vestibule. Thank you. And it'd be, it's like, oh, are we having whale blubber and sauerkraut again? And it'd be like, shut up and eat your sauerkraut and don't blubber about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it might have tied in somehow with, because I think more so than meat, they had such a high fat content.
It's true.
To deal with the cold.
Yeah, yeah.
And they would render the fat to have oils to light their simple lamps that would keep the teepee, just the igloo barely warm, so that simple skins and things would keep them warm enough.
Yeah. Man, it's fascinating to think about, humans in that context, right? For living for how many generations, like in and amongst the ice and snow, and the ingenuity they would come up with, not only with their diet, but also with, simple basic things like how do we cook? What's our source of fuel here? And humans are adaptable. Almost every single niche on this planet, like humans have, occupied it and thrived.
Around the equator where it's so hot, we need to sweat more.
Right.
And North Americans do the entirely wrong thing, which is eat ice or drink ice cold beverages on a hot day.
Right.
Which just messes up your circulation. And where a Mexican midday would have a bunch of cayenne pepper on their lunch, and then go sit in the shade with their sombrero over their head and just sit there and sweat for a couple of hours. And the evaporation would keep their body cool.
Right.
So people say, well, why does hot stuff grow where it's hot anyway? That's why.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, there are other herbs like peppermint, which has refrigerant properties.
Absolutely, cooling, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, we were talking about, horseradish and if there even is this scenario of like, the first person eating horseradish, cayenne and chilies and these types of things. I think what kept them coming back were exactly what you're talking about, that cooling benefit, not to mention like the endorphin raising properties of just feeling really good after a hot spicy meal. It's like it puts you into the state of like present moment and slightly elated.
It's an amazing thing, and I appreciate that my life shifted that way for all of the studying that I did behind essential oils and learning so much more about neurotransmitters, like the endorphins and other groups, and how amazingly they affect our immune system, for example, like coming out of a current plague. Endorphins are the most powerful stimulants for your immune system. And you know about this from working with chocolate, for example, right? Where we have the phenylethylalamine and all of those derivatives.
Yeah.
That I always like to say, nobody is more protected than a couple. I don't care whether you're straight or gay or whatever, none of that matters. A couple truly, deeply, madly in love is immune to just about everything.
Right.
You could walk hand in hand through acres of oozing, bloody, rotting corpses stinking in the air,
Yeah.
and kind of come out the other side. Like, honey, did you notice some sick people back there? It's like, yeah, I hope they're okay. And there was one woman picking up some product one day for me, and somehow that came up. And she said, well, you've just made sense of something for me. You know, my husband and I have been married for 38 years, and we do truly love each other, and neither of us have had a sick day since we got married.
Wow.
And it just was so, she was delighted
Right.
that there was actually science behind their success.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
And it's true. We all feel that. I mean, if you've been in love, you've been in, especially like that honeymoon phase. You know, the initial, just enraptured with each other. It's
You got a glow on.
You got a glow on. You're invincible. Like nothing matters. Like it's just you're just immersed in it. And as this woman suggests, like that's testament to you get a good dose of that, you get a good hit. And then the work begins, right? To maintain that in a relationship, that takes work, but totally worth it, right? To have that. Yeah, I'm always in awe of couples that have been around and together for that long. There's something really special about that. Maintain that fire, that flame, as it were.
And that can be, the love of, especially for women, the love of your children.
Right.
It doesn't have to be anything to do with sexual activity or anything like that. You could just love your cat enough, and it still helps your community,
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think, I know right now there's a lot of debate around germ theory, terrain theory. But if we kind of side with germ theory here for a second, the mother who tends to her children, she can't shirk back. I'm like, oh, you're sick, I better keep my distance. Like she gets right in there and it still hugs her children. And, there's no, there's an immunity there from that love and from that caring, regardless of what state that child is in. It's a necessary biological need. So it would make sense. It would have that built-in protection, wouldn't it?
Well, and it's something that's so unfortunate these days when we have babies that are born and never once breastfed. The magic of colostrum, it's literally an antibody soup.
Right.
That goes back generations. There may be something that your mother never even encountered, but your grandmother did, or her great-grandmother did. And those antibodies stay in that serum.
Right.
So even if an infant is breastfed for a few days, you get this incredible boost of immunity that otherwise is missing.
Right.
It's easy enough to get protein from a goat, but that colostrum is something that's so important.
Yeah. And, again, curious enough that humans can benefit from other species of colostrum. So it's kind of a hot, nutritional product, has been for a while now, is bovine colostrum.
Oh, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, from my understanding, cows we're similar in that way, but a cow absolutely requires the colostrum for exactly what you're saying, like the immune system and all that information, that download. Humans do too, but cows even much more so. And so what we source is what's called true colostrum. It's harvested within the first 4 hours, and I had a back and forth with somebody recently, not quite understanding, especially in relation to how it's harvested, is it ethical, that type of thing. And so if you do not give the cow the colostrum, for instance, if a dairy farmer is going to I'm going to take all this colostrum and sell it on the market and take it from the calf will 100% die. And or if they don't get enough, just set up a life of illness and a bunch of basically just a burden on that farmer. So it's in their best interest to make sure that the calf gets enough. And there's a very narrow window because it's not milk. It's something completely different, and it's what all mammals produce, right after birth. And it has these immune factors. It has these growth factors, and then slowly it begins to transition. So after the 4 hours is the cutoff that the dairy industry has kind of narrowed in at, because maybe it's 6 hours, maybe it's 8 hours, and then you start to get proper milk, and then there's it's called transitional milk, and then the colostrum kind of slowly gets phased out, and then we're just into kind of actual milk. But the two substances are very different, not only because of these factors we're talking about, but just kind of the fat, the protein, just the whole composition of it. So people who are allergic to milk can actually consume colostrum because it's a totally different substance, as long as it's harvested within that first window. So the calf gets all that it needs, and cows, even the difference between dairy cows and beef cows, different genetics. Like dairy cows have been bred to produce milk, and they produce a huge volume, typically in excess of what the cow needs, and everything's on demand, right, in that sense. So if the demand is there, i.e., sucking action from a calf or a mechanical something that a farmer puts on, the cow will produce. And it's the same with, weaning. As soon as you want to kind of wean, you start to slow it down. You create more gaps between the frequency of feeding and the duration of it. And so there is that factor as well. But a lot of people look to colostrum, either because maybe they weren't breastfed, they didn't get colostrum themselves, they're looking for that kind of top up, or just as that kind of next edge in immunity or muscle building or whatever. The colostrum can be a good source for bovine colostrum for folks who may need that.
Good to know.
Yeah. All right. We're just hearing your phone go in the background. That's all good.
So we're on the edge of spring, where we're going to have all of our extra nutritive friends coming back, like young nettles.
Yeah.
I absolutely love young fireweed plants.
Oh, yeah.
I have, I don't have my house and gardens anymore, but I made the habit of the fireweed in the right environment will grow, easily 9 feet. Like it has what's called an indeterminate raceme, where until a hard frost comes, fireweed might still be flowering in October.
Right.
It just keeps coming and coming and coming.
Yeah.
So I would always take some of the gone to seed portions of the lower plants and go up near the house and beat them on the ground to dispense seeds.
Right.
Because I didn't want to lose the plants in the spring, the ones closest to the sidewalk out in the spring sun. I would want to eat those as vegetables, so I'd lose all of the front part of the yard. Right. And then I'd get the seed stock from the back of the yard. But when they're young in the spring, and they're only about this high, they're quite a bright orange color, and they almost look like little flames. And they're just so sweet and crunchy, raw, like I could just eat a bowl of those for lunch.
Yeah.
And young nettles, of course, are so nutritious, and
Yeah, it's amazing. There's such an abundance out there in terms of wild foods and herbs. Like through a career, I would still consider myself, young at the game. It was only just last year that I got really into harvesting the young fireweed. I've known about this plant forever. I've done the fireweed tea. I've used it in different ways. But last year, guided by Denis, we were on it. We went and just got so many fireweed shoots, even before the leaves had even started opening up at the top. They got that little crown, so we'd be picking them, and we ended up pickling a good chunk of them.
oh, nice.
And they were amazing that way. Now, is fireweed, is it something that is it perennial via the roots, or is it just because it produces so much seed that then tons more plants grow up the next year?
I'm not certain, but I'm going to guess and say it's perennial.
Yeah, that was my sense of it too.
But it could be. You might have a point that it could be like pansies, for example, are just annuals.
Right.
But they seed so much that they just keep coming back once you've grown some, and that's why I think it's an old English name. They call them Johnny Pop-Ups.
Right.
Because wherever you've had them once, they just keep
Popping.
coming back, but they aren't actually perennial.
Yeah.
They just seed well.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I want to lean more towards it's the roots, and maybe it's both. It's always constantly reestablishing, because when we were picking those, every once in a while you'd pick one, and you're like, oh darn, like I got a whole bunch of root section, but it looked fairly well established anyways, and it was clear I wasn't pulling up the entire plant all the way down the root.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something to that in terms of fireweed gets its name, grows prolific after a fire. Maybe those roots, if they're deeper underground, can survive that fire and are ready just to, pop right up.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm excited for all the spring edibles. I've been really enjoying this winter. I'm not looking forward to winter ending, but everything has its season, and there's always something to look forward to in the next season. And it's those greens, and it comes back to what we're talking about in terms of diet and cycles, and everything's got a time and everything's got a place. Typically, right? It's heavier, more dense foods that you're eating, all winter long, and those greens are a nice welcome, fresh change that allows the body to kind of cleanse out as well, like nettles being a really good example of that.
Yeah. Well, and all the early recipes for root beer
Right.
were meant as spring tonics to help, like you said, you've been living off root vegetables from the root cellar and all sorts of
Yeah.
things, and
Dried and salted and,
yeah, insulted. And the root beer would be to stimulate the liver in particular to start doing a cleanse and getting all sparky with, it was fermented, right? But sarsaparilla, black spruce roots, there was a number of different dandelions
Yeah.
that all went into this. It was quite a bitter thing, really, to stimulate the liver.
Yeah.
And now we end up with this ultra sugared stuff that you eat with a cheeseburger. And most people don't understand the significance of.
Yeah. Actually, so many of those beverages, like the soft drinks of today, they've all got herbal roots. Root beer, of course, being the most obvious. Coca-Cola being another one. I mean, that's supposedly the kind of the most valued, secretly guarded recipe. So Coca
Yep.
One of the most amazing plants from South America. And then cola, being cola nut, one of the highest caffeinated nuts of, I think, West Africa, I believe, is where it comes from. And then they had nutmeg, they had orange, they had a number of different other herbs in there. And still to this day, they actually use coca leaf in the production of Coca-Cola. So it's decoconized. The only legal importer in the United States is a subsidiary of Coca-Cola, decoconizes it, sells the cocaine, I believe, to the pharmaceutical industry for a nice handsome profit, and then the rest goes into Coca-Cola with the other botanicals, but unfortunately bastardized with high fructose corn syrup, caramel color, and all kinds of other horrid ingredients.
Tonic water.
Yeah, tonic water.
Was a malaria cure.
Right. Cream soda.
The original source of quinine.
Right. Yeah. Now, cream soda, one of the key flavors is vanilla, and there are actual recipes, and there's still a very popular beverage. I believe it's, what country is it? Might be Switzerland, where they actually have like a milk-based carbonated beverage that's like soda. So hence the cream. Like where's the cream in cream soda?
Right.
Yeah. Well, it actually used to be fermented, from things like whey. Yeah, because you'd have a lot of excess whey from cheese making and that kind of thing.
Kind of like marshmallow.
Right.
You can do this thing where you whip it enough that it does make a kind of a frothy thing that you would sweeten. It's got nothing.
Yeah.
Well, it does. It's not. It has nothing to do with it. It's totally the history behind craft marshmallows, which are now just sugar and whatever is in there. I don't know, glue.
Yeah.
But that was a wild plant. And
Yeah.
it's still out there in
Yeah.
kind of semi-marshy areas, I think.
Right.
Not in water, but wet feet kind of thing, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, hence the name, marshmallow, yeah.
Yeah. And and its properties are very mucilaginous, kind of slimy and lubricating in that way.
And of course, you're a big pollen harvester.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love the pine pollen. Did I ever tell you my story about? Have you ever met Julie Walker? Full Circle Adventures. She does a lot of like plant walks here. She teaches cross country skiing.
Locally?
Yeah, locally.
Well, because the name's really ringing a bell, but I'm not coming up with a face.
Yeah, you guys, you would love each other. You would have a great time connecting. I'll introduce you if you don't know her. So I've worked with her on and off. She's definitely been one of my teachers, and we were doing, wasn't this last summer, but the year before. It was like, about mid-August, right? You can always like sense like mid-August, right? There's just like, oh, there's been a shift, like we're into those late stages of summer. I can feel autumn coming. And Julie was just like 100% tuned right into that. She's like, oh yeah, I'm just like, I feel my body shifting. I feel like, the activities, the things I want to do, like I'm just right into that kind of like, winding down, late summer into autumn mode. And I was like, I'm not. And at that time, I was taking pine pollen every day, which to me has this energy of spring. It's like just like because of the the bioidentical testosterone in it. It just has this, for me, this kind of like drive to like just energy. And I took it every day for a whole year, just kind of as an experiment, and felt great, albeit. I could sense how I was maybe a little bit out of season, like I was always in spring, just kind of go. So it appealed to kind of my one part of me and my just kind of like drive and work ethic and that.
And never excessively hyper state kind of thing. It was just nice clean energy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So Pine pollen, looking forward to that. And spruce pollen, we didn't get any last year. I don't know, somehow I missed it. But I think that's also just the way nature is. You know, certain years you get an abundance of something, and other years it's like, no, not so much. Actually, I was watching a video the other day, somebody further south than we are, so a little bit closer to, much closer to spring. And he actually pulled all the taps on his maples, turned them off. And he said, you know, this year he got the message not only from nature, but from indigenous communities that say, like, this is not the year to harvest the sap. The maples just aren't producing. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, talk about things rising in price 400%. We'll see if that actually has an effect on the market. But just the way that it's been, apparently it's kind of due to like last summer, less moisture. Certainly that has continued through this year, the El Nino. So yeah, first I've heard of that. Somebody, I can't remember where they were, somewhere in the States, they're like, done. Like they literally barely got anything, and they're just honoring the cycle of nature, and just like, this is not the year for tapping. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. And I think the Balm of Gilead will be a little bit earlier this year as well. So I'm looking forward to getting out and harvesting that.
Yeah, you've got to be really on it with the weather, because if it gets, sometimes we get really warm Chinooks early on, and the rosin has literally melted.
Right.
It's almost not worth harvesting the buds, because it's all
right
gone from melting off, becoming dry and crystallized in the sun and kind of crunchy, and
right.
Yeah, it's just not good product. I've been through that over the years.
Yeah.
It's something I took to doing years ago, was to always, in my daytimer, to keep notes of any harvesting day and date and how it was on a particular trail and that sort of thing, so you'd know.
Right.
Like, just with exclamation marks, big Arnica Day sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
On a particular trail where the same date next year might be similarly bountiful.
Right.
Or not. Because of the weather.
Yeah.
And rotting logs that might produce Pleurotus austriatus, one of my favorites, the oyster mushrooms.
Right.
And you might get them from the same tree in the forest for 3 years straight, and then it's done, because the tree's rotted, right? It's over.
Yeah.
Got to go find some new sources.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good to keep those diaries.
Yeah. Yeah, and then looking back, right? Like, what type of patterns? Are there anything that you see, you know, cycles of? Of course, there's so many factors, isn't there, to nature? But one just needs to observe, be tuned in. All right, well, it's been a good chat this morning. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back next week, another conversation. And feel free to post any comments, questions down below. I'll also include the link to the upcoming Herbal First Aid with Blaine that we have going on in April. So we still got lots of time for you to check that out, register, and...
I have a gruesome story that I was talking to one of my, not romantically, but lady friends who's helping me with shopping a bit and stuff with my isolation, about the importance of having a little mirror in your first aid kit, which might someday come in handy for signaling.
Right.
A plane or somebody you can see people up on a ridge there or something.
Yeah.
if you've, as I have over the years, you might have slipped and fallen face first into some dead branches or something, and you've got quills or whatever to pick out of your face, you really need a mirror.
Right.
So I had been talking about the importance of tweezers, and I remembered a day where I was with Dorothy, actually. She was visiting in town, had very little time, and we wanted to see each other, and I had one of these camp out weekends coming up, and I always like to get out a day early to get tarps up and wood cut and all that sort of thing. And she's been such an outdoorsy person her whole life. It just made sense that she would come along. And I think the way it was going to work was that my wife at the time was working in the health food store that day and was going to come out in her car at the end of the day so Dorothy could come with me and then bring my wife's car back into the city because she would then come home with me in the truck later and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, Dorothy and I had been preparing wood and everything all morning and then broke for lunch, and the camp was all tidied up, and I just kind of looked over and went, how did we miss that branch? It just didn't make sense to me, and I went over thinking I was just going to throw it in the brush pile for fire starter.
Right.
And it didn't come. And I was a bit confused, and I tugged it a little harder, and it still didn't come. And so I really yanked it, and this huge branch, which was buried in a foot of soil and litter and stuff from past campers, it finally let go and swang up and got me right in the face. And I had several dry, brittle, red lodgepole pine needles that had punctured my whole face.
Wow.
And one of them went right into my eyeball. It pierced my eyeball.
Yikes.
There was a few others that were through my eyelid,
Right.
but one of them was right there,
Wow.
right in the iris.
Really?
And so we were sitting there, and being seasoned as we are, Dorothy and I were both so, what do you want to do? And I thought, well, if we bother to go back into the city, what are they going to do at an ER? Pull it out and put an eye patch on it.
Right.
And I thought, well, in my big first aid kit that I would have on such occasions, I have an eye patch, and I may as well just do this myself. And it was one of those reminders of when there's an accident of some sort, the last thing you want is somebody screaming and carrying on. Oh my gosh! Look at all the blood! Oh, they're all gonna die. You know, whatever. So one of the first things a lot of people want at the top of their first aid kit is rescue remedy,
Right.
just to institute calm.
Yeah.
And somebody can even be unconscious. I had one fellow that had just been smashed by a car and rolled up onto the boulevard, and I knew I shouldn't touch him because he likely had a spinal injury. You don't take somebody like that and say, hey, wake up, shake up, are you okay? Because that could be major nerve damage. So I just let a couple of drops of rescue remedy fall on his lips, and I was right in his face, and just prior to doing that, the only off button that you own for the adrenaline response is a fully extended diaphragm. And that's why that old expression of, Margie, just take a deep breath, would you, honey? That's pure science backed.
Right.
About how we can just turn off the stress response. So before you are going to try and help somebody, the last thing you want to be is freaking out yourself.
Yeah.
So big deep breath, and I put a couple of drops on his lips, and his eyes opened immediately, and I was right in his face and just said, "Hi, I'm Blaine. You just got clipped by a car. I think you're going to be okay, and I'm just going to stay here with you until the EMS people get here." What's your name? "Oh, hi, Bill. Hear those sirens, Bill? Those are for you. I'm just going to stay here with you."
Mm-hmm.
You know, but anyway, back to I knew that if I was shaking, I might break that needle and end up with it stuck in my eyeball,
Yeah.
which would probably require surgery then, and it might even get more complicated, scraping the eye socket and whatnot, if I try and drive back into town. So Dorothy agreed with me that we should just deal with it here. We have everything we need. And I remember looking over, I had a half a Nalgene bottle full of distilled water sitting there on a stump. And I remember saying, I wish I had some German chamomile. Because I didn't, but I just used lavender as all the best I had. Essential oils, when you're running a still, they're small enough to fly with the steam.
Right.
But a lot of them, it's about 1 to 3 parts per thousand will dissolve in the distilled water.
Right.
That's a big part of what hydrosols are all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rose hydrosol, for example, has a lot of rose oil in it, and then the rest of it, just like fat separates when you're making soup, rises to the surface and we separate it off, right? So anyway, I was using the mirror on the side of my truck and made sure that I'd had some nice deep breaths so that I wasn't quivering, because I just couldn't break that needle. And I hesitated, and Dorothy said, "What's wrong?" And I said, because I always handle trauma with humor somehow. It's my survival mechanism.
Right.
I said, "Well, I'm just a little worried that when I pull it out, I'm going to shoot around the forest backwards, like a balloon would, you know?"
Yeah.
But I'll never forget the ever so whispery, squishy sound of pulling that needle out of my eyeball.
Wow.
And we just shook up that distilled water in lavender and irrigated with it, and I kept irrigating my eye for the rest of the afternoon, and because initially it was bloodshot, right? I had a few other pokes in the sclera, but that one was right in the iris. And I hadn't thought of that story for a long time, but it came up when I was writing the handouts for the course about the importance of having tweezers and a mirror.
Right.
Always.
Yeah, yeah.
And
yeah.
Some first aid kits have, you buy a little first aid kit and it's not worth buying because you've got like scissors that would never cut gauze and
right.
tweezers that,
like
I always say,
could grab anything.
Yeah, if you can't pluck an eyebrow hair, don't buy them.
Right. Yeah.
That's why most stainless steel tweezers are gold dipped, because gold is very soft.
Oh.
So that's why it's not a fashion statement. It's that the tips, when they're gold coated, will actually grab things so you can pull them.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, I thought of that story. So there's a bunch of things like that I'm coming up with that I'm writing into this handout.
Yeah.
So that, there'll be many stories I'll forget, but then they'll be into writing and people can read it when they get home or whatever.
Yeah. Sounds like another book in the works here.
But it's just going to be the handout for the And I wanted to make sure I got on that so that you didn't have a rush to get it printed at the closer to the date, right? I'll have that to you in a week or so.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, gosh. And I got thinking about when I was talking with this lady friend on the phone later about that, and she enjoys my stories, and I told her about how there's been times where somebody has recommended one of my herb walks, for example, or whatever, and a friend meets them later and say, well, because I share personal stories, and well, how was your outing with Blaine? It's, it was great fun and so many stories. I learned a lot and everything. It was a great day. But I got to tell you something. If we're ever out in the woods together, I'm going to stay 100 feet away from that guy at all times because he seems to have the worst luck. And I just say, no, it's like, when you use power tools a lot, a day comes when you slip, kind of thing. And
it's proportionate to the amount of time you spent outside.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time barefoot alone in the forest over the years. And I remember one Christmas party with my dear friend Damon Johnson's family back in Prince Albert, and there was this famous, on Christmas Eve, this famous family recipe of seafood chowder that was worth driving 8 hours just to get a bowl of that stuff.
Right.
But I was talking about something with somebody else and just said, well, shit happens. And his younger brother overheard me and just kind of, it was one of those old bull, young bull transfers where Desmond said, no, Blaine, shit develops. And I remember going, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
So the real first aid or second aid is noting somebody doing something stupid.
Right.
And just remind him that, hey, I'm just trying to have fun. Yes, but I don't want to carry you out of the forest.
Yeah.
We're hours away from help, and what you're doing is actually a bit dangerous. So would you mind ceasing? Cease and desist?
Right.
Or a lot of people would say, well, the best way to learn is from your own mistakes. And I go, well, if I watch somebody stick their finger in a fan and there's blood all over the walls, I'm not going to try it as well.
Yeah.
So I think the best way to learn is from other people's mistakes.
For sure.
And that's why I don't mind sharing these stories,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm unlucky or a klutz. I've just, like you said, it's time in the saddle, right? Things develop over time.
Yeah.
So,
this is going to be a real treat. Spend the afternoon with you, hearing the stories, and learning about those simple things that you want to have. Like you just mentioned, some tweezers, mirror. Yeah. Laura, I've always kind of let her kind of take the lead on those kinds of things. So she does have a mirror in her first aid. But I need to take ownership of that, really understand, what should be in there, carry one myself, not just leave it to her. So I'm looking forward to it.
I just had a flash of, we were planning I think it was a New Year's party out in the woods. And you probably know a fella named Kim Price, probably a client of yours, Kim and Alana. Any bells? No?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, we had to drive a little ways away from the camp to find enough dead wood and fill the truck twice to drag it all back. And I'd cut this tree down and I was just doing something, turned around, and I slipped on some snow on top of a log or whatever and did a face plant right into a dead spruce branch. And my whole face was just punctured, with all these dead, sharp little prickles, right? And I had just stood up when Kim came back from around the corner where he was, and his face just turned white when he saw me.
Yeah.
And I said, "Is it bad?" And he said, "Oh, buddy, what have you done?"
At least it wasn't in your eyeball this time.
And I looked down, and the whole ground in front of me was wintergreen.
Oh.
All right, one of the pyrolas. And I just sat down on the log and started crushing up wintergreen leaves with a bit of snow and holding them on my face, patting them. And it works quite quickly, especially with the snow, to stop the bleeding.
Right.
Like, wintergreen is an incredible first aid herb. And he said, well, we gotta, don't we want to, where's your first aid kit? And I said, back in camp. He said, well, we should go. And I said, no, I think I'm going to be okay here. He was so surprised that I didn't want to run back and get out my first aid kit.
Right.
I said, no, we'll just finish loading the truck up and then we'll deal with it in camp.
Yeah.
He was so surprised that I was that calm.
Right.
But I trusted the wintergreen, and like I said, when you need something, it's just usually there.
Yeah.
And it was literally right in front of me. I didn't even have to take 3 steps.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
It was just right there in the, what do they call that in the winter? The snow tunnels, is it called, when you have like 5 feet of snow over there, but this can affect skiers. Sometimes you get too close to a big fir tree or something, and there's I think they're called snow tunnels, wells.
Yeah, wells.
Snow wells.
Yeah, like tree
where
wells.
You're skiing and you can fall under a tree kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was sort of like that, where the ground was mostly dry and the wintergreen is wintergreen, and you crush up the leaves are about this round, you crush them up and just pat them on. And they're one of the natural sources of salicylates, so it's pain relieving. So you got like fresh aspirin.
Yeah.
And it's astringent, so it stops the bleeding. And yeah, I just sat there for a couple of minutes patting my face, and yeah, we're good. You know,
Yeah.
he just, it's so amazing how things like that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. But you got to be in the know. What's around you? Most people would have no idea. They would just run screaming.
And usually when you run screaming, you've left the remedy behind.
Right. Yeah.
I always like to bring that up when I'm talking about funnel web spiders in West Australia, where they have antidotes now, but the traditional remedy that the Aboriginals would have used was just the bark and leaves off the tree. And the interesting thing about it is that they only build their webs in melaleuca trees.
Right.
So if you've been bitten and you run screaming,
Right.
you're probably going to die.
Yeah.
But if you stand there and ask for guidance,
Yeah.
and this is where all of this gets spiritual, you kind of go, wait a minute, you want me to crush up the leaves and some bark from this tree, the one with the spiders in it? Are you kidding me? You know, like,
Yeah.
if you're capable of channeling information that way,
Yeah.
like, you're just messing with me, aren't you? Like, what a silly god, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's like that sometimes. You just have to stand your ground. And
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's, we brought up this idea of like, the first person. A lot of people think a lot of this stuff came about through trial and error, right? Like, how did we learn about poisonous mushrooms? Well, how many people must have died before we figured that one out? A lot of times it's like, it's that message that comes, right? Like, that's how this wisdom has come through. And people have known.
I've probably told you about an experience I had when I was probably about, 4 years old or whatever. I'd left a picnic. I think this was probably back at Waskasiu Lake.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the baneberry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a full clump, shiny, beautiful red clump of berries.
Yeah.
Right, I was probably having a pea, just right at eye level, and I was reaching for them. And my whole life, until more recently, I always thought that was some sort of hallucination that happened, that
Right.
that the plant talked to me. I heard this sort of witchy or grandmotherly voice or whatever say, "What do you think you're doing there, you little whippersnapper?" And the plant literally warned me.
Mm-hmm.
And until I had read and learned more recently in my life about plant spirit communication, I had to revisit a whole lot of experiences that I'd had in my life.
Right. Yeah.
That weren't hallucinations, they were real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hope you guys enjoyed that today. Great conversation. And yeah, we'll look forward to doing it again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give us a like, share this with someone you know who would benefit, and subscribe so you're up to date with all the new episodes coming out. You can shop online at lightcellar.ca as well as visit us in the heart of Bowness in Calgary, Alberta.